Yo, what is up guys, and welcome to another Wild Rift video. And in today's video, I got an updated tier list for y'all. After the release of KASSADIN, a lot of stuff has changed, and people have gotten more used to the new elemental rifts. So some new champions have really popped up, especially into the S plus tier, and like the lists are super exciting to see for you guys. But before we get into them, just a quick word from the video sponsor. This video is sponsored by wildstats.gg, and they've added something new yet again. So besides the leaderboards, the champions, you also got the top guilds now. So if you have a really nice guild like the Wild Rift family, Unknown Project, and all of these other guilds, you can actually see yourself up here as well. So let's talk about the leaderboards, right? Like you can see which player is the best player right now, and keep in mind, when they have these swords next to them, battle stats are available. So if I want to see what Bizarre plays, which is the number 4 player, how he's able to get that win rate, how he's able to get this high up in Challenger, you just click on his name, and then it loads up his stats. You can see how fast he ranked up to Challenger. Like, it only took him a few days, and you can see his exact stats. You can see what he plays. He actually plays Misfortune, a 63% win rate on Misfortune. That is crazy. Everything is above 60 here. Wow. But what I truly love the most is this right here, the history. Like literally being able to see exactly what people play. Oh, I just clicked on Misfortune herself. So you can also see for our champion itself what the win rate is and what the pick rate is. And interestingly, I didn't even notice. You can see that Misfortune is popular with these champions and then strong against Jhin, Tristana, Akshan, and Caitlyn. So I didn't even know this existed. I accidentally clicked on it and now I saw it myself as well. So this is actually amazing. This is very helpful. You can just look at a champion and see if he's strong against certain champions or weak against certain champions. And it's true. Misfortune is weak against Jinx and Kai'Sa. So yeah, that is it. You can check it out yourself as well in the link in the description. So back to the video. So let's start off in the Baron lane. And the thing that hasn't changed, which is Jax. Like, whenever I saw the Jax change, I already knew that he would be absolutely monstrous, like broken in the Baron lane. And yeah, he is. He definitely is. Like, he can survive the early game super easily, and when you get to the late game, it's game over. Like, he's even stronger than the old Jax if you put him in the Baron lane. It's crazy. It's like jungle Jax all over again, but in the Baron lane. So right now, if you're good at Jax, you can abuse him so hard in the Baron lane. Another champion that is incredibly good is Renekton, but for different reasons. Like, Jax is really good in the late game, but Renekton is quite the opposite. He's very good in the early game and can absolutely demolish pretty much any matchup, really. Like, you demolish a matchup in the early game, roam around for objectives, get your team ahead, and even in the late game, you can get the Stone Plate and just be a massive tank for your team. A champion that is not a massive tank, but still very, very good is Fiora. Now, a lot of people love Fiora and a lot of people hate Fiora, and there is a reason for it, because Fiora is just, when you have a good Fiora player, you guys know how it feels, right? Like when there's like the split push Fiora player that is destroying everyone, and that is the playstyle you have to play with Fiora. I wouldn't say she's as good as Jax and Renekton, because she's not quite the solo carry, but if you put her in the side lane, she applies so much pressure that you have to roam around with like 2 players to stop the Fiora. If you go with only one, you're never going to be able to stop her, so she kind of always has an advantage in that way. And a champion with yet another very unique playstyle is Wukong. So Wukong can play every lane safely. I mean, sure, there's a few matchups that absolutely stomp Wukong, like Nasus, for example. Like, Nasus absolutely destroys Wukong, but there's not a lot of champions that can do what Nasus can do to Wukong. You can just play your lane safe. You either win your lane or you just play it even. And then when you get to the late game, you just team fight. And Wukong during team fights is just crazy with that ultimate, with the tankiness. And especially, as I said, with the new Stone Plate. The new Stone Plate really made a lot of new champions shine because it fits them so well. Another champion that's very good is Garen. Garen, I mean, does he even need an introduction? He got nerfed multiple times, but he's still so incredibly good. Like, the tankiness that he provides is unrivaled. The second ability in the late game, reducing damage for like 5 seconds, which is unbelievable. I mean, that amount is just unbelievable to me. So unless you have true damage, you're truly gonna... wow, I wanted to make a joke there, but I sucked. Never mind. Unless you have true damage, you're gonna have a really hard time going through. Let me just say, normally I screwed it up. So he does get hard counted by the champions like Camille, Vayne, and stuff like that. If those champions are picked, he's not even close to S plus tier. But if they're not picked, that's when he's S plus tier. That's when he's an incredibly strong champion. Next up is Darius, and Darius has fallen off a little bit, but he's still sitting in the S plus tier. And the whole reason is his ultimate, to be honest. Like, if you're just good at proccing that ultimate of his, you're gonna hard carry team fights. Like his laning is a bit weaker than before, but if you just have to be able to hit your first ability, do these small combos. But Darius is still the same as before with his ultimate. If you can get that reset, he just destroys everyone. Riven, she got nerfed a little bit, the third ability, but she's still incredibly broken. Like, the late game team fight, mid-late game team fighting, not just late game. She already shines super hard in the mid game. Early game, she's also pretty strong at 1v1s. Only if you fall behind, you struggle a little bit with Riven, because Riven is an in-your-face type of champion. You have to go in, but as long as you're just not super behind, you should be fine with Riven. She does struggle a little bit in 1v1s against certain champions, but as I said, she compensates with it in team fights. Next up is Seth, and I mean, I know Seth is good. I don't really play Seth, but I know he's good. Like the true damage, his laning, his team fighting. He's just an all-round solid champion. Camille, on the other hand, super insanely strong late game. She's weak early game. She does struggle early game in the lane matchup, but you can go Fleet Footwork or Grasp of the Undying to counter that out. But when you get to the late game, she's incredible. 1v1s, team fights, everything. Like late game, everything. Everything is good about her. She's tanky as well. But of course, you have to get to that late game. You know, level 9 is where she starts to shine. But level 13 is where she truly starts to shine and deals the full true damage that she has. Next up is Gragas. And honestly, I always put Gragas in the S+ tier for a reason. But I put him in the S tier now. It's just full AP Gragas is, in my opinion, like this is my opinion, completely broken. But I still put him in the S tier because maybe I am just really good at full AP Gragas and I have a biased opinion about it, but in my opinion, it's absolutely broken. But because I don't see that many people play it, it must not be that broken as I think, right? So that's why I put him on top of the S tier instead of the S+ tier. Jace got a pretty substantial buff. The buffs to the ultimates really sucked for Jace because he doesn't have an actual ultimate. So every champion essentially got buffed in the recent patch, except for Jace. So they compensated by giving him a little bit more damage when you transition, which is pretty nice. You know, it's pretty nice in the Baron lane. You can dominate early game, but late game he kind of sucks. He only has some poking. Next up is Malphite, who I think is incredibly powerful. I still haven't made a Malphite video, actually. I should make you guys a Malphite video, because he's so good right now, especially with the Iceborne Gauntlet. When they changed it, it perfectly fits Malphite, because it skills with armor too now, or sorry, the damage skills with armor too now. It's amazing. It's really, really nice. Next up is Olaf in the Baron lane, and I prefer him in the jungle because he's pretty decent at ganking and these small fights, but he's also good in the Baron lane because of his true damage. Works very, very well against a lot of these bruisers, tanks, and stuff like that, so you can shred right through them. And of course, during those team fights, he's also very, very good in the early game, but he does suck in the late game. Keep that in mind when you play him in the Baron lane. Another champion that I find very, very underrated is Mundo, Dr. Mundo. This champ is so powerful in the Baron lane as well. Like, especially when you're up against another tank, like the Garen, for example, your first ability chunks down these tanks so hard. They deal percentage HP damage, so it doesn't matter how much HP the enemy has, you'll chunk down a percentage of it. So if you're up against a lot of those tanky champions, you know, also Thresh, for example, you just throw your first ability on them and you do so much damage with it before the fight even starts. So like, Mundo is just really, really powerful. Of course, when he uses his ultimate, his tankiness is through the roof. And now with the new Mundo, he also does a lot of damage. The lower you get as well, the more damage he does. So Mundo is definitely a formidable threat. Next up is Teemo. And yes, Teemo is in the S tier. And I will make a video of him. I'm sorry, I've been a bit busy these days, so I wasn't able to make a Teemo video yet. But I will make a Teemo video for you guys. It's one of my favorite champions. And the change to his ultimate really makes him shine now, especially with my build. Like, I made a Teemo video a few weeks ago with the special build, with the Awakened Soul Stealer. That one build really shines on Teemo now. Like, I'll make an updated video. You guys wait for it. Next up is Shen. And Shen is a bit questionable because what I always like to say is Shen is good, but he shines when another one of your teammates is really good as well. Like, for example, if you have a Master Yi in the jungle, he engages, he knows that you follow up. Then you follow up with your ultimate, give him the barrier, and it allows him to tank up the damage. You go in, taunt everyone, blah, 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 right? Like, that's the point of Shen. But if your team doesn't do that, if your team never actually does these good engages when they can expect a Shen to follow up, Shen is pretty useless. It's like so hard to play. Because the whole point of Shen is you split push, and then you ult towards your team when they need it. And it's up to your team to make the ultimate worth it, right? I'm not going to talk about every champion in A tier. I'm just going to talk about some that I find interesting. Cannon, which I find extremely underrated. Very, very strong. His ultimate is such a powerful tool in this game. You know, he skills infinitely in the late game as well. And his early game is not even bad. Like, his early game is definitely not bad. He can poke out those bruisers. The only thing with Cannon, though, is you need some tanks in your team. Because your team kind of expects you to pick, like, some sort of a melee, at least, you know, tank, semi-tank in the Baron lane, like the Jax, Renekton, Fiora, etc. But if you pick Cannon, you have to make sure the rest of your team has some tanks. Like, you know, Alistar support and a Wukong jungle, for example. Then it's okay to pick Cannon in the Baron lane. Same story for Teemo, of course, right? Next up is Vayne, and same story for Vayne as well, but I think Vayne is a bit of a special champion, because when you're up against like the Darius, the Garants, you know, even the Jaxes, you can absolutely steamroll them with Vayne. I believe I've made 2 videos where I played top lane Vayne, and I really recommend you guys to check them out, because it's disgusting if you play it correctly. Next champion that I want to talk about is Nasus. He really fell off. He's really not that good anymore, because they reduced, or they increased the cooldown of his first ability, which makes it harder for him to stack. So you're not going to be able to get as many stacks, which nerfs him early game, mid game, late game, and forever. It nerfs him. It's just an overall nerf, which Nasus couldn't really take, to be honest. Like, he doesn't suck. He's good, but he's just not as good as he used to be anymore. So next up is the jungle, and Shyvana is still S+ tier on top. And yes, I know I told you guys I'd make a Shyvana video. As I said, I've been a bit busy, so I didn't play too much. But I will play again next week, and I will make you guys a Shyvana video. I played like, I believe, like 30 Shyvana games already, and I'm really good at her already, so I'm ready to make the video. I just want to make sure I master the champion fully before I make the video, so I can share everything to you guys. Next up is oh yeah, the reason why she's good, of course, because she can stack her stacks so easily, the 400 stacks, and get her ability upgrades, and especially the upgrade at 300 stacks is what makes her super good, which is the true damage on the third ability. Like, whenever you reach 300 stacks, that's the moment where she really starts to come online. Sure, 400 stacks is also good because you get bonus health, but the 300 stack one, the true damage, is incredible. 3% of the enemy's max HP true damage, and your first ability does 2 times on hit, so you deal 6% HP damage. You shred through any tank with Shyvana, and that's the whole point of her. Like, that makes her super powerful. And you're not even forced to take dragons anymore. Like, you don't have to, because it doesn't, you know, you get it from the stacks, not from the dragons. Next up is Wukong, and Wukong is absolutely incredible. Like, nearly as broken as Shyvana right now, because of his team fighting, his first ability, and just overall. His ganking is incredible. He skills infinitely in the late game. He becomes so unbelievably tanky, and his second ability is so annoying in the late game. The clone is just crazy annoying to deal with. Next up is Olaf, who is the complete opposite. Super powerful early game, can run right through any CC, which is the power that he has, right? Like, you want to pick him into these heavy CC heavy compositions, so you can run right through everything. But he falls off in the late game. That's the only weakness Olaf has. The next champion is also ridiculous, which is Kha'Zix. I played some Kha'Zix games this patch, and he is just so strong. The isolated damage is just through the roof. Like, when you're snowballing the game, you can just keep snowballing by constantly catching out the enemies. And even if you're not snowballing the game, if you isolate an enemy, you do so much damage that you can still kill like a high value enemy as a Kha'Zix, especially because your ultimate allows you to become invisible, so you don't get caught very easily. And your third ability allows you to jump if the enemy tries to jump away. So it's just such a strong champion. If you know how to play him, you can always get those isolated kills on him. Next champion, which is one of the most disgusting champions in the game, is Evelynn. And does she really need an introduction? I'm sure you guys have been introduced to Evelynn by getting one-shot by her, right? And to be honest, that is the reason why she's so high up. So her early game sucks up until she reaches level 5. That's the moment where she can start to gank. She won't do a lot of damage, but she can start to gank because she's invisible. She's literally invisible. But when you get to those later stages of the game, you can just go into the backline of the enemy because you're always invisible, engage on the enemy ADC, use your third ability, first ability, and ult, and you just one-shot whoever. Like, that's the whole thing with Evelynn. You one-shot them, and you disengage as well with your ultimate. So it's like a win-win situation, and it essentially turns the game into a 5 versus 4 always. Next up is Xin Zhao, and even though he got nerfed, he actually got a pretty substantial nerf. Like, the first ability, 1 second cooldown nerf, definitely hurts him, but he's still S+ tier. He's still very powerful. His ultimate is just so good, and just him being able to push everyone away whenever he wants to is just such a strong tool at his disposal. And also, obviously, blocking all the damage from the enemies with his ultimate is just so good. And he does so much burst damage as well. And his early game is incredible. Like, he can actually win a 1v1 against Lee Sin early game. The only problem with Xin Zhao is his damage falls off late game. So you kind of rely on your team to carry, though. Next up is Riven, which is the same story as Baron Lane, to be honest. You know, her early game is okay-ish, but it's all about the mid game and it's also the later game. Like, her team fighting is so strong. It's absolutely disgusting, and especially when you combine it with an enchanter support, she's just unkillable. Next up is Echo, and Echo jungle is incredible as well. His jungle clear is, I think they nerfed his jungle clear actually, but he's still so good at the jungle because his ganking is good. He skills so well into the late game, and he's just good. He's just great. Like, when an enemy gets to a low amount of HP, he can finish them off as well. He's just very good. Like, solid champion. That's really all I have to say. Good assassin, can skill up to the late game pretty easily, has decent ganking, and it's just good. And next champion who I've lost a little bit of love for is Lee Sin. Still S+ tier, but man, this champion is like, he's literally enabling your teammates and just kind of throwing everything to them and telling them, okay, now you guys carry me, right? It's like the meme. Well, you guys probably don't know the meme, never mind. You just carry until the late game, and then your team has to carry. But you can understand the problem that you're going to get with that, right? If your team sucks, you're just going to lose the game. Whatever, like, it doesn't matter what you do early game. You can be 20-0 with Lee Sin and still lose the game. And it's like normal. It's literally normal. Because if your team sucks, you are not going to be able to kill 5 people in the late game. Lee Sin's kit just can't do that. So here, Gragas, same story. AP Gragas in the jungle is incredible. Like, if him and Evelyn are the top AP picks in the jungle. Well, actually Morgana as well, never mind. But like, AP Gragas jungle is so good. His jungle clear is incredibly fast. Not in the early game, but in the mid-late game. Like, you can clear jungle so fast and accelerate your lead. You just have to get through that early bump. Like, the early game. Get through that early bump, and then in the late game, accelerate your lead. His ganking is phenomenal. His farming is amazing. His team fighting is amazing, and his one-shotting potential is amazing as well. So just get through that early game, and he's broken. Like, late game, broken. Next up is Nunu, and Nunu is just very good at a lot of things. He can secure objectives very easily. He farms pretty fast. His ganking is good. His team fighting is great. His tankiness is great. He doesn't do that much damage though, and that is why he's in the S tier. But just the rest really makes him a solid jungler. Next up is Morgana, who has the fastest jungle clear in the game. That's right, she has the fastest total jungle clear in the game. She takes objectives very fast. Her ganking is decent, I guess. But the problem is her early mid game sucks. She only really comes online in the late game with her ultimate and her second ability and all that kind of stuff. So you have to push yourself through the early mid game, try to get some objectives, try to get some ganks, farm yourself up as much as you can. But when you reach that late game, she's very powerful. Next up is Graves, who's good. Like, overall good champion really. They did nerf his jungle clear, but he is still good. Like, nothing much to say about him, to be honest. Just good. Overall good champion. Mundo, very underrated in the jungle as well. His jungle clear is pretty fast, and while his ganking is definitely not the best, his early game fighting is surprisingly good. It's much stronger than I thought, and it's especially because he becomes stronger when he gets to a low amount of HP. Like, the enemies never expect your damage when you get to a low amount of HP. And obviously, when you reach level 5, that ultimate is huge during those small fights, right? Like the 2v2s, the 3v3s. And that's honestly what makes him S tier. Like, even in the late game, 5v5s are so easy with him. Just get the stone plate, use your ultimate, and you'll never die. Next up, I want to talk about Vi. And Vi, the thing about Vi is her ganking is amazing, and especially with the changes to the ultimates, it makes her quite the amount stronger because she really relies on her ultimate. It's basically like playing Zed. When you play Vi, you constantly use your ultimate to catch out an enemy, and that's really it. You're very tanky, and you're very good at 1v1s, but besides that, during teamfights, you're not that good. You're really not that strong, so keep that in mind. So you can catch out enemies very easily. You have to play it like Zed, essentially. Next, I want to talk about Master Yi, who is, in my opinion, a stupid champion, but he works in the jungle. Much stronger than some people may think. Like, he's incredibly powerful. His jungle clear is pretty fast, his ganking is pretty good, and his small time team fighting is amazing. Like the 2v2s, the 3v3s, when the enemy is a bit at low HP, and you use your ultimate on Master Yi plus the true damage and the first ability, you guys know how that goes, right? Triple kill Master Yi. That's exactly how it goes. So those are the things with Master Yi. As long as there's no massive CC to stop you, Master Yi is just not broken, but insanely powerful. Nautilus jungle, meh. He's good, but I still haven't found a reason to play him. I've seen it a little bit. I just really don't like it. His ganking is so slow. Like, sure, you can gank with your ultimate, but again, it's just so slow, the ganking with the first ability. It's so hard to pull off. It's like trying to gank with a Blitzcrank, for example. It's just hard to pull off. And Blitzcrank is even better, actually, because he has the bonus movement speed with his second ability. I want to talk about some other champions too, which is Rammus. Rammus, actually, I would put him. You know what? This is how I would put the list. Rammus and Amumu. So Rammus is stronger than people may think. Very, very tanky against certain matchups. Of course, you don't want to pick him into like heavy AP champions like the Orianna, for example. But if you're against a lot of AD champions, Rammus is a broken pick. It's insane. Next up is Amumu, and Amumu is really, it's not that good, but he can work. Like, his ultimate is such an important tool at team fights. His late game is insane, but his early game just sucks. That's the thing. Like, late game he's insane for multiple reasons, because he's very tanky, he's very annoying, he constantly slows you, his ultimate is very good, and of course, the second ability, the passive, which allows you and your teammate to do 10% of the damage in true damage. So you're gonna shred right through the enemies, regardless of them having armor or magic resist when you have Amumu. You and your teammates. Next up, I want to talk about Rengar. He sucks. Like, Rengar sucks. What else should I say about him? This champion just really sucks right now. Now we go on to the mid lane. So Diana is still Diana, still broken. They didn't nerf her, right? I don't recall them nerfing her, so I'm still putting her on top of the S+ tier. Like, whenever you see a Diana that's good, she's gonna steamroll everyone. Next up is Orianna, who is, as I said, the safest champion in the game, and she's so good. I'll make a new Orianna video very soon as well. Like, she's just, if you know how to play Orianna, you can just always pick her and win. Like, no one counters Orianna, except for Diana, I guess. Diana's probably the only champion that counters Orianna. Nothing else really. Like, I can't think about any champion that counters Orianna. Maybe Annie, because Annie can one-shot her, I guess. But if she doesn't one-shot you, you can just use your third ability to get a shield and you survive anyways. But that's what I mean. There's no counters to it. Next up is the new champion KASSADIN. And I've played him, yes. And I carried a lot of games and I got destroyed in a lot of games, but I understand that he's good. You just have to get good at him. His late game is unrivaled. It is unbelievable how strong KASSADIN is in the late game. But he does have counters. His counters are tanks and bruisers. These are the only two things that counter him. So, stuff like the Darius, the Wukong, the Riven, the Camille, etc. Those champions. Anything else he counters. For example, if there is a brand on the enemy, if you're in the late game, you just one-shot that brand, and he can never, ever, ever do anything about it. The reason that he cannot do anything about it is because you jump on him with your ultimate, then you silence him with your first ability, so he cannot flash away, he cannot use his abilities, and in that 1 second, you use your third ability and second ability, and you kill him. Can literally not do anything. So even if an enemy is mobile, you just jump on that enemy, silence them, and one-shot them. So there is no counter to them. There is no counter to KASSADIN. Like, if you just play him properly, there's literally no counter to him. So when you reach level 13, with the Rod of Ages and the Archangel Staff and the Rabadon's Death Cap, he's unbeatable. Like, he's unbeatable for the squishies. Sure, the bruisers can still beat him, but squishies, they should never be able to deal with you in the late game. Next up is Karma in the mid lane. Very, very strong. Like, her damage is just amazing, and her ganking is pretty good, and her late game is unrivaled as well. With the third ability, the late game shielding is still so broken. They did nerf it, but it doesn't really matter. They only gave it a flat nerf, but it really doesn't matter. It's still so broken. Next up is Ahri, and Ahri change makes her so much better during team fights. Like, she's still kind of the same Ahri with ganking and early game and stuff like that, but now she's also good in the late game, because you can reset your ultimate during those team fights, which allows you to deal more damage, be more mobile, and catch out more enemies. So, you know, she's still very good early game, but now she's at least decent late game. She used to suck late game, but now she's decent. Next up is Veigar, and Veigar, man, this champion is so disgusting. He deserves to be nerfed. They did nerf him, but they only nerfed his tankiness, which really doesn't matter that much, to be honest. His damage is the real problem is, because he just one-shots enemies. And the third ability, oh, the cage, oh my god. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it now, how absolutely toxic the cage is. I believe the stun duration is like 2.75 seconds on max level. So that's the reason why Veigar is just crazy, crazy good right now. Next up is Yasuo. I really started to fall in love with Yasuo because he's so strong. It's like, I've seen a lot of people play him and he does so much damage. His ganking is not the best, but the good Yasuo player, you know, you can maneuver yourself so incredibly well with the third ability, and that's honestly what makes him so strong. So good Yasuo players, it's the same story as Aurelia, who's the next champion. Good Yasuo and good Aurelia players are going to be super, super good at the game. But if you suck at them, their champion is literally useless. So it's a very high skill cap champion, both of these. And if you're good at them, you can play them and absolutely dominate. Akshan is very good as well because let me see. Well, I thought Kraken Slayer would be amazing on it, but it really isn't actually. Conqueror is still better, to be honest. But Akshan himself is just so good. With the third ability, especially, it does so much damage. It's crazy. This champion is just crazy. I don't think I've made a video of him yet, actually. Well, I have, but not in the recent patch. I definitely should. Yeah, I should. I should show you guys why he's so good. Next up is Ziggs, and Ziggs is a champion that no one is playing anymore, but he's still insanely good. Like, he's still so damn powerful with his bombs, his ultimate, his late game. Just him being able to play his lane safely, he's still very, very solid. Next up is Zed. And as I said, you know, Zed, with the ultimate changes, it really buffs Zed, because Zed is all about his ultimate in the late game, right? Early game Zed is good, mid game Zed is great, but late game Zed used to suck. The only good thing about late game Zed was using a random ultimate, but now you can do that more often, right? Or they buffed it in the early mid game, I mean, but it doesn't really even matter when they buffed it. It's just a buff overall to Zed because he's all about his ultimate. You want to be using that ultimate constantly and killing enemies every time with the ultimate. Katarina, same story as Yasuo and Aurelia, really. The good players are gonna absolutely smash you. Although I feel Katarina is a tad bit weaker than these two champions, but she's still insane, like insanely powerful. I wouldn't say this much weaker though. I would put her here, like better than these two for sure. Like these three champions can absolutely terrorize your games with good players. Next up is Echo. Echo is also good in the mid lane. He does good damage. He can survive the lane pretty easily, and when you get to the late game, Echo is insane, of course. As I said, he doesn't really struggle in the mid lane against many champions, unless you're against something like an Orianna or Karma or something. But he shouldn't really struggle, because you also have your second ability to give you the barrier, and your ultimate, of course, to escape. Next up is Brand. Brand has become much better with the buff to his first ability. They buffed the stun duration by 0.25 seconds, which is actually pretty massive. I believe it went from 1.25 to 1.5 now seconds, so that's actually pretty big. Like, you can catch an enemy more easily now, and it's really good. I need to make a Brand video for you guys too. I actually played like 60 or 70 games of Brand, but I still haven't mastered into a level that I am comfortable making a video for you guys, because in my opinion, he's very hard. He has so many different combos and different things, and I want to show you guys everything and tell you exactly why each combo is good. So for you Brand players out there, I'm working on it, but I want to give you guys a good video. I don't want to rush it, okay? Get that. Twisted Fate, AP Twisted Fate is great. They buffed his damage a little bit, but they nerfed his attack speed, which makes him a bit weaker during the laning phase, but a bit stronger in the late game. He's good. He's just good. I mean, what could I say about him? He's just pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good. Gragas AP in the mid lane, same story. Full AP Gragas always works. He doesn't get bullied by anyone, even ranged champions, because of his first ability. He can just outpoke them so easily. And of course, his all-in potential is amazing. So Gragas AP also works in the Baron lane, in the mid lane, sorry. Akali, I don't really like Akali because her early game sucks so badly, but her late game is insanely powerful. And the good Akali player can get to that late game. And then when you do get to that late game, you can just absolutely solo carry on Akali. She has become stronger late game and weaker early game. But that's what makes her a bit weaker in the mid lane, because she can get bullied in lane. But as I said, if you do reach that late game, it's game over. Well, not really game over, but you're really gonna struggle dealing with an Akali. Next up, I want to talk about Annie, who has fallen off a little bit because they did nerf her, but I still think she's good. I played Annie this patch as well, and she's just good. Pretty good, on top of the A tier. Like, her late game is insane, her ganking is good, just, like, it's really about her ultimate. Add it with a proto belt, it's insane. Like, you can one-shot any backline carry. If the enemy has a Lux support, for example, you just one-shot her. If they have a Jinx, you just one-shot her. You one-shot these champions. But the problem is, if you're against a Vayne, for example, who built a With's End and Mercury threat, you don't one-shot her up until like 4 items. So that is what makes me put Annie in the A tier now instead of the S tier, because there is counters to it. You can build a Maw of Mormortius or Magic Resist or With's End, which really delays Annie's power spike up until 4 items. 3 items actually, not 4 items, because your third item can be a Void Staff. So 3 items, not quite 4, but 3. But that's still definitely a delay. Next up is Pyke. I think Pyke is okay in the mid lane. Not amazing, but just okay. His ganking is great though. Like, he can gank very fast with his second ability. His hook is good for ganks. His third ability is good for ganks. And of course, his late game is very, very good. In the mid lane, you can get more fat than as a support. He does struggle a little bit in the mid lane, but they buffed his sustainability with the passive. of the second ability, I believe. So when you go in a bush and the enemy can't see you, you'll heal up more HP than before. So it's just, he's overall just okay in the mid lane. Fizz, also okay, you know, good assassin, but Stasis Enchant counters him. Now, Stasis Enchant did become more expensive though, but he's still, I would still say he's solid in the mid lane. He's definitely not amazing though, but he's just solid. Like, I've tried Fizz a few times, and he does struggle in the current meta because he really sucks against bruisers. You can't one-shot bruisers, and a lot of bruisers are very good in the current meta. I want to talk about Aurelion Sol too. For you Aurelion Sol lovers out there, he's just he's good, but only in the good hands. He has such a unique playstyle that only the true Aurelion Sol mains can excel at. If a random player picks up Aurelion Sol, it's just not gonna work, and it's just not gonna work. You guys may know it, right? Because that's why everyone thinks Aurelion Sol sucks. The thing is with Aurelion Sol, only Aurelion Sol masters play this champion, so he can't get overbuffed, because then these Aurelion Sol 1 tricks are gonna be way too good on him. On to the Dragon lane. So, right here, a lot of my opinions have changed. Where is Vayne, by the way? That's the champion that I forgot. Vayne. I was like, I must have forgotten one champion, and it was Vayne. So, now I figure it out. Ezreal, S+ tier, top. In solo queue, Ezreal is super good, because early game, he doesn't do that much damage, but you can play safe. Mid game, he already starts to come online. Muramana, and then with a Sheen, you already start to deal decent damage, and in late game, he's crazy. He's one of the best ADCs in the late game. He can poke so hard. His all-in potential is great. His escapability is great. His ultimate is great. Just him in the late game is just incredible. There's not many ADCs that can beat that out. Like, even something like a Jinx can get destroyed by a late game Ezreal. Another crazy late game champion is Vayne. Vayne is a bit harder to play than Ezreal though, because you do have to get close to the enemy. But Vayne has the tools to do that, right? She becomes invisible, she can push enemies into the wall. But as I said, she doesn't have as much range as Ezreal, which in my opinion makes her a bit weaker than Ezreal, but they're definitely neck on neck. They're both nearly equally strong. Next up is Kai'Sa, and Kai'Sa is great as well. Her early game is good, her mid game is amazing. Like, during the first dragon, she becomes so powerful. Then she may have a bit of a moment where she's not as powerful, but when you unlock the third ability and get more items in the late game, she starts to become super strong again. So she has those power spikes, and she's just... The thing about Kai'Sa is as well, you can always pick her. Her ultimate mobility is super nice because you can dive the enemy backline, and her 1v1ing is very good because of her isolated damage with her first ability. Next up is Lucian, who's... Lucian is... How do you say it? Like, his mobility makes him super nice, and his mid-game damage. Lucian does fall off a little bit in the late game, and the reason is because of his range. He doesn't have the same tools as Vayne, right? Like, he doesn't have the invisibility, so you do have to get very close to the enemy to actually deal damage, which is a bit of a weakness of Lucian in the late game, because of course you can get one-shot by assassins or like bruisers or something. So besides that, Lucian is insanely strong. His early game is good, and his mid game is insane. But his late game, he can struggle a little bit, but he still does great damage. Next up is Xayah, who's actually better than Lucian in the late game, but she struggles early game. But her ultimate, her feathers, her third ability, that's what really makes Xayah amazing in the late game. Also the bonus movement speed and the attack speed that your second ability gives you. Like, she really has all the tools to carry a game in the late game, which makes her an S+ tier champion. Now, a champion that really doesn't want to get into the late game is Draven, which is the next champion. Even though that is the case, I still put him in the S tier. He actually got nerfed. His first ability does less damage now, but he's still an S tier champion, because I just feel like if you do snowball the game with Draven, then it's not game over, but his damage is just through the roof. And I also learned recently that if Draven has a good enchanter support, he can also carry throughout the late game. Like, even when everyone has full build or nearly full build, if the Draven is a good player and he has an enchanter, a good enchanter with him, he can actually still carry in the late game. But that's only with a good enchanter. And also Draven is very good into enemies that engage on him because of his third ability. He can just push you away and keep going. Next up is Caitlyn. I had a very long period where I really didn't like Caitlyn, but now I'm starting to understand why she's very, very good again. Because of her massive range, right? She does decent damage. It's not amazing. Like, sure, early game she does pretty good damage because she has a long range, and late game, but her mid game, she sucks. Like, she really sucks mid game, which in my opinion kind of hurts her a lot, because there's a lot of ADCs that do shine in the mid game, right? Like the Kai'Sa, like the Lucian, like the Ashe. So during that period, it's a bit of a black hole, I guess, for Caitlyn, where she's just kind of weak. She really doesn't do that much. But then in the late game, when you upgrade the traps, when you have 5 traps during team fights, that's where she starts to shine again. Next up is Jinx, who you should only, to be honest, you should only be playing with enchanters. Good enchanter with Jinx is like game over in the late game. Good Jinx players should know that, you know, with the rockets and all that. But besides that, Jinx is just average. Like early game, she's not strong really. I mean, her rockets are pretty decent, but she's not that strong. Mid game, it's okay. Late game, she shines, but not even that much without an enchanter support. Next up is Ashe. And the thing about Ashe is, her early game is weak, but what I love about Ashe is the slows and just the unique playstyle that she provides. When you hit an enemy, that enemy is not supposed to be able to run away anymore because you either use your ultimate on that enemy or you just keep attacking that enemy, which perma slows the enemy, which becomes more and more in the late game. And then on top of that, I made like a lot of different Ashe builds for a lot of different playstyles. You can play her differently. You can play poke Ashe, you can play on hit Ashe, you can play full crit Ashe. Like there is multiple different ways to play Ashe, and each different way has a different playstyle. So I recommend you guys to check out some of my Ashe videos if you want to learn it. It's really fun to play. Next up is Orianna. Yeah, that's right. Orianna sitting in the S tier in the Dragon Lane tier list because also in the Dragon Lane, always a safe pick, always a good pick. You can just always pick her. She's never gonna struggle in lane. And another champion is Veigar. Him as well. You can pick him in the Dragon Lane, stack up, especially with Alistar, by the way. I'm gonna give you guys the secret combo right now. Alistar Veigar is broken in the Dragon Lane. Try it with a friend of yours and come back to me. So I'm quickly gonna explain to you guys how it works. Alistar goes in, engages with a headbutt pulverize combo, and you as a Veigar instantly put your cage on the enemy and put it in a way that it instantly stuns the enemy. So like your Alistar stuns here, and then you put your cage like this. So at this point, you stun the enemy as well, and then you all in and you kill the enemy easily with ignite, ult, and everything. That's the secret of Veigar. You can play Veigar with another engage support as well, like the Thresh, for example, but Alistar is perfect. Varus has fallen off a little bit with the changes to lethality Varus because his arrow cooldown is quite a bit longer late game now. On hit Varus is better now, which is AP Varus, or perhaps a Blade of the Rune King Varus. But AP Varus has never really been that good, so Varus has fallen off a little bit. And here, you know, Ziggs, Lux, you can play them in the Dragon Lane, they're pretty good. Tristana is okay, I guess, but she just really has to scale into the late game. I don't really like that. It takes a while to really scale into the late game as Tristana, but if you do scale into the late game, she becomes one of the strongest ADCs in the game. But it's, of course, you know, you don't always get to do that every game. Next up is Miss Fortune. Like, only good thing about Miss Fortune is her ultimate, to be honest. Like, her first ability is good in lane, I guess. But in the late game, you're really only playing around your ultimate. So, I mean, she's decent. She's decent because her second ability is also good. You know, when you get ganked, Miss Fortune is very good against ganks because you can hit multiple enemies one after the other, which constantly procs her passive bonus damage. So she's okay, but she's so incredibly hard to pull off. Like, I really only recommend you to play Miss Fortune if you're truly very good at the champion right now. And Jin, yeah, Jin sucks now. He just really sucks. Like, he doesn't fit the current meta. All these other ADCs are just stronger than Jin. You're really always gonna get outplayed as a Jin. Also, Jin sucks against tanks, and tanks are very good in the Baron lane, the jungle. So Jin just doesn't really work this patch. Next up, which is the last list, it's gonna be the support list. And the top, I don't even have to talk about these two, Yumi, Karma. I mean, whoa, they're broken. What a surprise. They're still broken. Damn, I never thought that would be the case. But yeah, Yumi is just, I would even put Yumi like here, like on another tier because, but of course the only reason Yumi is not that broken is because you do rely on your team somewhat because your teammate has to do the job. You're just a stupid cat that's attached to the enemy that's buffing the enemy. Attached to your teammate that's buffing your teammate. But the buff that you provide is so unbelievably massive that you just have to pick the right teammate, and the buff is just gonna make him or her carry the game so easily. And Karma, you know, with the third ability shielding, still insane. Next up, we got Pyke, and that's right. Pyke is, in my opinion, the third best support right now. Not that many people are playing him though. I would have expected to see more Pyke because he's good now. Like, they keep buffing him. They keep buffing his stun. They keep buffing his passive. They keep buffing everything about him. And in my opinion, he was already fine. He's just hard to play. His playstyle is very unique. But if you do understand him, I'm going to make a Pyke video. I actually haven't even made a Pyke video. I have made one, but very long ago. I'm going to make a new Pyke video for you guys as well. These are all champions that I'm working on. But as I said, I'm a bit busy, so I haven't been able to make all of them. But yeah, I'll make a Pyke video for you guys and show you guys, because this champion is insane right now. Next up is Thresh, and yeah, Thresh is still Thresh. You know, good Thresh player can make it work. Very good at ganking. Skills very well into the late game, by the way, because of the armor. He gets 2 armor per stack now, which is insane. And of course, 1.5 ability power as well. And then, you know, the second ability to save your teammates. Just, he has very high potential, very high skill cap. I believe that's what you call it, a high skill cap. So you can, high skill ceiling, that's what it's called, a high skill ceiling. So the ceiling is very high, you can get better and better and better at him. And yeah, that's the champion that Thresh is. Alistar is a bit of an Thresh in easy mode, I guess. Well, it's not that easy, but Alistar is crazy. Alistar is one of the best turret divers in the game. So if you have a good composition to follow up turret dives, then you pick Alistar. Next up is Nami, who's one of the best enchanters in the game. Her laning is very good. Her late game is also very good because she gives movement speed to allies, and that ultimate of hers is just, oh, so powerful. The massive wave during a team fight, very, very good. Next up is Rakan, who's also insanely powerful right now. His CC is amazing during team fights, and sorry, that was a cat meowing very loudly here. And what was I talking about? Rakan, yeah. So he's good at laning because of the healing and of his first ability. And team fights, he's amazing, of course, with that stupid ultimate of his. I hate Rakan. I hate playing against Rakan. He's such a strong champion. Next up is Lulu, who is essentially Yumi number 2. She does the same as Yumi. And in some ways even better. Like if you're up against assassins, Lulu is even better than Yumi because of her ult. If Zed goes on your ADC, you as a Lulu can just use your third ability and ultimate to shield your ally, and then you can use your second ability to polymorph the enemy as well as the assassin. So if you're up against assassins, you pick Lulu. Any other scenario, Yumi would be better. Senna is good support, you know. You do need to have some tanks in your team to pick Senna. And yeah, Senna is a bit of a meme pick, to be honest, because it's kind of like a secondary ADC. But if you're good at Senna, she's very, very strong. Next up is Sona, and I finally put Sona down in the A tier. I always put her in the S plus tier or the S tier when I started playing her, because she was so broken and no one understood it. But now Riot has finally nerfed her, and they nerfed her good. Like, they nerfed, first they nerfed the healing on her second ability. Now they also nerfed the shielding that it gives to all of your teammates. And they didn't nerf it in the early game, they nerfed it in the late game. It's not a massive nerf, but it's enough of a nerf that it really hurts Sona. You just give less shielding to your team. I believe it's like 30 shield in the late game. So every time you use your second ability, you're going to be giving 30 shield less to your teammates, to each one of your teammates. So still insanely powerful, but not broken like before anymore. Janna is good. You know, the buff to her tornado really, really helped her out. So she's good. Soraka, she got nerfed, but she's still pretty good. Who else do I want to talk about? Braum. I don't really like Braum that much. I mean, he's good against like an Ezreal or something. But I just feel like he doesn't seem to fit that well into this meta. I wouldn't really be able to explain to you why. It's just a feeling. Like, I'm just not really seeing Braum's shine that much in my team or in the enemy team. Gragas, I mean, Gragas... Every list, Gragas' name gets mentioned. This guy really needs to go away. Like, we don't want to see him everywhere. Next up, you know, you have these more aggressive supports like the Seraphine, Ziggs, Lux. I don't really find them to be that good. Like, it's very good to be oppressive in your lane, but they don't skill as well into the later game, or they don't really provide other things that these supports provide that are very important to the game right now. And then these are champions that you should never pick in the support, which is Annie and Malphite. So, that is it for the tier list. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next Wild Rift video. Bye-bye.